I am Brad Keelor. He is Michael Bennett. Coming up next on Director's Cut, find out the story behind the Geotechnical History Blog. Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Director's Cut. My name is Brad Keelor. I'm the director of the Geo-Institute, and that is why we call this show Director's Cut. Every single week, except during the summer and 1 week at the holidays, I sit down with a different Geo-Institute member who has stories to tell. Some of them are personal, some are professional, but all of them are fun. If you don't know anything about the Geo-Institute, I always question how people find this if they don't, but nonetheless, we are happy you are here. And everyone, after you watch this interview today, should head over to geo-institute.org. And while you are there, you will learn so many things, namely that we are a technical society with about 12,000 members, most of whom are geotechnical engineers and or geologists, and that we are part of the American Society of Civil Engineers. And of course, while you're there, you maybe could read a blog post or two. I feel like that's related to our content today. If you like what you see today, and you're going to, so why bother waiting? Just click like, subscribe, and get notifications, and we'll let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel. So now, a special treat. It's always a special treat on Director's Cut. He is a couple different things. The author of the Geotechnical History Blog, as seen on geo-institute.org. He is also a geotechnical project engineer at Gannett, Fleming, Inc. in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. It is Michael Bennett. Michael, welcome. Thank you for doing this today.
Brad, good morning, and thank you for having me here.
We're going to have a great time the same way that we do every week. We have 10 questions the same way that we do every week, and 2 of them are the same way that we do every week. We must begin with one of those. Describe your job in 45 seconds.
A job in 45 seconds. Okay, here we go. So, Geotech Group at Gannett Fleming works on geotech design and construction oversight for infrastructure projects. The majority of our work, I'd say 60% or so, is for PennDOT and the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission, but we also work across many other sectors: railroads, such as Amtrak and New Jersey Transit, water and wastewater treatment, and dams.
So this is a new job for you. Still, we can still use new. We don't even have to say new-ish. Your logical follow-up question here: when you start a new job, what's on your checklist? What are the first things you do?
The first things I do when I start a new job. I'd say the first thing I do when I start a new job is to really try to get to know the company, because that will really inform whatever actions I take as I start to settle into the job. I feel like, I know that's a bit of a squishy answer, but I never want to have too rigid a set of rules to go into a job with, just because I have to usually adapt on the fly to whatever the culture of the company is.
No, I think that's a good answer, though. And I do wonder also, I mean, I find when I was younger, it was much easier to start at a new place. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think your brain is just a little more malleable and you're more flexible when you're younger, and it gets harder as you get older because your routine is upended and everything. I mean, even though you're much younger than I am, have you found this to be the case? Do you look back to those days when you were fresh out of school and feel like it's more challenging to start over again now?
I would say it really depends on how settled I feel at a given company. Part of that is how long I've been there, and part of it is also how good the fit has been throughout.
Yeah.
I've gone from a good fit to a better fit to an even better fit to the best for the moment fit. And so
I think your management's going to be happy with that one. That's
well, it's helpful that it's true.
We have to get to the fun questions on Director's Cut. This is, I usually call it the meat and potatoes. Some might call it the bread and butter. Some might choose to use a non-food analogy, which is probably better. I will do my best to think of one of those. I also strive to think of questions that we've never asked anybody on Director's Cut. All these episodes in, it gets more and more challenging, but there are so many questions out in the world. Michael, I came up with this one for you. What's the
Oh
most
boy.
disgusting medicine you've ever had to take?
Well, it's not quite a medicine, but it's a medical procedure. I have very sensitive gums, and I had to get periodontal surgery on them. And so to thicken the gum tissue over my bottom front teeth, I needed more tissue called gum matrix, which is basically the cartilage that's below your gums. It hasn't really been made synthetically yet, and so there's only one source, and that's a donor cadaver. So they took this matrix from the cadaver, they washed it clean of any biological material, so it was just this cartilage, and then they put a small incision in my gum and slid it in there. And so the operation was a success. My gum tissue is in significantly better shape now, and I do feel thankful that donor agreed during their lifetime to make that contribution. Oh, yeah. And you can definitely say that that's something I've chewed on a bit.
Did you know way in advance that this was going to happen, or is it something that just came up? Because I feel like, I don't know, I'm the type of person where if I thought about that for years and years and years, it would really get to me. But if I went into the doctor and they said, hey, or the dentist in this case, and they said, hey, this is something that has to happen, we're doing it Wednesday, I'm pretty okay with it in that scenario. So how was this for you?
I think I was told I needed the gum matrix about 2 weeks before I actually got it. So more the second, but I don't know that would have changed necessarily if I had known in advance, because not only is there no biological tissue, but the donor agreed to do this during their lifetime. They were not only on board with it, they wanted to do it. So.
Oh, man, it's like sometimes we do a PSA for getting involved in ASCE services and stuff. I think this might be our first one for organ donorship, right? Go into your DMV account in whatever state you live in and check that box if you're so inclined. This is the success story. Yeah. The third question is always the researcher practice question. We do not ever deviate from that because Director's Cut ultimately, is about order. I think anybody who's watched that episode knows that. We're very orderly here. You told a great story in Geostrata when you were featured in the New Faces column about what the difference between what young engineers learn and how they apply it in practice. Well, it turns out you've got another one of those stories that you'd like to tell today, and I'd like you to tell it. This is great.
All right, let's go. So it was definitely the case for me, Brad, that when I entered practice, I needed time to really appreciate how the topics you learn about as a geotechnical student are both absolutely necessary for what we do every day, and also probably about 10% of what we do every day. And the rest is what you learn on the job. And one thing that I've really figured out is once you start digging, all bets are off. And a story from my previous employer really calls this to mind, because we were working on a project to build a new on-ramp to a bridge over the Lehigh River in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And the proposed ramp is right next to a building that was at one time Bethlehem's main train station. And so I was out there with my boss for a site visit as part of the process of getting bids from drillers. And I noted to him that the site's history with the railroads meant that we could probably encounter some interesting surprises during drilling. And my boss knew I was a train fan, and I think he probably was rolling his eyes internally and thinking, if I say yes, will you stop talking about this? But he's a good guy, he's a gentleman, and so he politely agreed, and that was that. So fast forward a few months. Another inspector and I were supervising the digging of test pits for stormwater infiltration. The backhoe bucket hadn't gotten even a foot into the ground when we heard the unmistakable scrape of steel on the hard object. And of course, you fear that it's a utility, but that wasn't it. We went over another 30 feet to the other test pit location, darned if the same thing didn't happen. So we ended up having to offset both of those until, a couple feet at a time till we started being able to dig. And as the backhoe bucket really started to dig into the soil, it began coming up with soot-covered ballast and rusty spikes, and even a no trespassing Norfolk Southern sign that wasn't doing much good 2 feet underground. And we realized this must have been where the rail bed was before the tracks got pulled. And I had a strong suspicion, and confirmed through a subsequent photo search back in the office, that what we had hit was therefore the old passenger platform at this station. And as I said to my coworker, "Are you kidding me? The one time I didn't want to bother with any train stuff, we run right smack dab in the middle of it."
Oh, I have so many follow-up questions here. So I feel like whenever you say something like you never know what you're going to find, I mean, I don't doubt your sincerity here, especially you being a train guy. But I feel like most of the time when you say that, you don't really want to find anything when you're digging. That's just that the possibility's kind of out there. Now,
Yes, agreed.
the other one here. So, as a kid, my aunt ran auctions, and I saw somebody buy a box of antique railroad spikes at one of these auctions. So I thought, what a great idea. I'll go out by the railroad tracks and I'll collect railroad spikes that have fallen out, and I will then sell these at auction. It was kind of a get rich slow campaign, if you can imagine that. Well, I was like 10. I did not have the wherewithal to sell these things. Also, no one wanted them because they were just regular run-of-the-mill spikes, right? We left them all behind in the house in Michigan because, of course, they're very heavy. My question for you that comes out of this is, did you get to keep any of this stuff that you found?
At this site in particular?
Yeah.
I didn't keep the spikes or plates or anything like that. Certainly the no trespassing sign wasn't going to fit into my car. And at some point, as you've alluded to, you only want so much rusty debris building up in your house. I have a healthy collection of spikes and other things from my childhood days. But at one point, the backhoe did break a chip off of the old platform, and I still have that chip.
Oh, that's awesome.
It is quite literally a chip off the old block. And from what I understand, the platform is going to be demolished when they end up putting that ramp in there. So this might well be the only piece that makes it out.
Oh, that is fantastic. I love that it was right there next to you on the desk too. Show and tell is one of the best parts of Director's Cut. We like that. So thank you for having that there. Question we haven't asked in a while. And, in Virginia, at least, once Mother's Day comes and goes, it's summer. I don't care what the meteorological seasons say or whatever. It's pretty warm outside. Theoretically, you could go to the beach if you really wanted to now, and the flowers are all blooming and summery things are happening. We start thinking about vacation. Michael, describe your ideal vacation.
So I really love hiking, and the world has a ton of great places to do that. So for lack of a better tiebreaker, I think I would go to the American West, just because, don't get me wrong, I've traveled internationally many times. I always find it to be a wonderful and enriching experience. It's just my take that, all other things being equal, I would rather help the U.S. economy and get more familiar with my country's sights and scenes. So I think a place like Yosemite or Joshua Tree, of the parks I haven't visited yet, would be really awesome to go to. And then if I could, I'd do the trip with a few friends or with a group, because travel's so fun. I just like sharing the experience with other people.
Yeah. So then we have to turn this around a little bit, because we can do a little national park nerd out here. Of the parks that you have been to, what's your favorite? And then maybe give us some trail flavor from when you visited there, so that we can get some recommendations out for people before summer starts here.
Sure. So back in my Virginia Tech days, my parents wanted to take a vacation with me. And I said, well, 4 hours down Interstate 81 from Blacksburg is the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Why don't we go there? And we spent a week hiking there. We had a couple encounters with bears, which is never necessarily fun. And these aren't the kind of bears that just swipe your picnic basket. These are bears with claws and about 500 pounds of mass. And all you can usually do is put your hiking poles up so that you can give this thing a quick poke if you need to get away. And then, you start shouting and clapping. Hey, there's a bear. Hi, Mr. Bear. And of course, bears don't love that, so they run. But I would say that was really the only negative of any of those hikes. The scenery is lovely. The wildlife, when it's not coming close to you, is very interesting. And I don't know that there's another place that's really like that in the eastern United States that has that topographic relief, and certainly not with such high altitudes as you will get in that region of the Smokies. The one other place east of the Mississippi River that I've been that was anything like it was the New River Gorge. But I went there when it was a national recreation area before it became a national park.
Right. Okay, so give us a couple of trail recommendations for Smoky Mountain National Park. And I think one of the great things, and maybe you'll talk about this a little bit, is if you're a super intense hiker, it's great for you. But there are also a lot of places in that park where if you weren't really ever going to get out of your car except to look at the view, you could also do that, right?
Sure, like I think it's Clingman's Dome or Mount Mitchell, one of the two of them, where there's an observation tower at the top because it's the highest point in the Appalachian Range. And you can pretty much drive right up to it. It's a quarter mile of paved trail, and then you walk up to the top of this observation tower, and you can look out over the Appalachians in all directions. It's really beautiful. I think the encounter with our Earth sign friends was on the Ramsey Cascade Trail.
Okay.
And that led back into the I forget what it was called, probably the Ramsey Cascades, now that I think about it. Two waterfalls that were not the largest ones, but were very, very beautiful. And that was off the beaten track. And it was a good place to really feel connected with nature.
That's excellent. And we always do this for our viewers. We'll put links to those trails down in the show notes. So if you want to hike them, if you want to get to the top of Clingman's Dome, and I mean, if you want to see a bear, I think it's one of those things that's exciting after it happens and nothing bad happens to you.
Yes.
Then it becomes a great life experience.
I've had a few encounters with bears of different kinds. I saw one in the Poconos once, and my family looked. My mother said, "Oh my God, a bear!" And this bear and her two cubs looked at us, and it was as if the mother was thinking, "Oh my God, a person!" And they turned and ran.
That's the best kind of bear encounter. I feel like you can still say that it happened, but
you're there to say that it happened, right?
You are a product of Lafayette College Civil Engineering program. We had Mike McGuire on just a few weeks ago, and Mike, of course, professor at Lafayette, talked a lot about it. We didn't ask him this exact question, though, so you are the lucky recipient, Michael. What makes the civil program so special at Lafayette?
So, a few things. First and foremost, I think, is the small class size. We had about 30 people in my graduating Civ class. And since Lafayette is undergrads only, which I would say is the second thing, you get the full attention of the professors. I took surveying my sophomore year, and I still remember how the professor, somebody with 30 years of teaching experience, a doctorate, a license, and who worked on the side as a consultant, spent a good solid 15 minutes with me one day, making sure I felt fully comfortable setting up and working a total station. And Lafayette also has, reason number 3, a strong program in both engineering and the liberal arts. Excuse me. So I was really able to nurture my passions for both civvy and history there. Now, a lot of institutions can probably offer one or two of those three things to their civvy students. As far as all three, I think Lafayette's in pretty select company. And the fourth, which I would say would make Lafayette truly one of a kind, is that I'm not sure there's another institution in the country that can claim to be the birthplace of engineering history. There was a Lafayette Civvy grad, class of 1871, named J. Elfrith Watkins. If, like me, you're from the Philadelphia area, you know the name Elfrith's Alley. That's his family. And he got hired on at the Pennsylvania Railroad, and shortly thereafter lost a leg in a train accident. So the railroad now had the question of what to do with an engineer who was down a leg, but was not only trained as an engineer, but was willing and able to do whatever he could in that role. It just so happened that one of their locomotives, the oldest one they had, named the John Bull, was pushing 45, was sitting in pieces at one of their railroad yards, ready for scrapping. And the railroad said to Watkins, hey, if you can get this thing up and running, it might be a really valuable tourist attraction. People could take a look at the history of our railroad, and then could also get a good idea of the services our railroad can provide for them in the future. And so Watkins started taking this thing all around the country, most notably to the Philadelphia Centennial Expo in 1876 and the Chicago World's Fair from the Devil in the White City book in 1893. But he also really started to fall in love with the history of the discipline. It may have been that he wouldn't have chosen it on his own to start, perhaps, but once he was in, his commitment for it pretty quickly started to exceed what his job required. And he wrote a couple of historically themed articles. I have those on the history of American engineering and the development of railroad tracks. And then he was also the founding curator of the technological wing of the Smithsonian Institution, which not coincidentally is where the John Bull now resides on permanent display.
That is an amazing story. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why Michael is the author of the Geotechnical History Blog. So my link there, I know Elfrith's Alley because my undergrad institution was St. Joseph's in Philadelphia. It started on Elfrith's Alley in 1851. Before it moved, I forget where the second location was, and then in the 1920s it moved out to its current location on City Line in Philadelphia. The other question, I mean, we're going to talk more about that blog later, and hopefully you got another good story or two for us. But the other question that we ask everybody when they come on the show is, how did you first get involved in ASCE and GI?
Sure. So you mentioned Mike McGuire being on the show. He was my intro to geotech professor at Lafayette, and he really hooked me on the subject. He now makes me call him Mike, which is definitely a change of pace. It's hard. He did a top-notch job of making his class, I should say, challenging, but not impossible. He also did a great job making it wide-ranging and not overwhelming. That is a very delicate balance, and he walked that tightrope really, really well, in my opinion. And once the bug bit me, I was not going to go anywhere. I took Mike's course on foundations and earth pressures. I did an independent study with him on railroad geotechnics. Then I parlayed the independent study into an honors thesis on remediating railroad tracks and weak subsoils beneath them. So I had Mike 5 times, which was probably plenty for him. But what isn't a joke is that he has been just a terrific mentor to me. He was really influential in my decision to pursue my master's at Virginia Tech. And while I was there, I earned the degree and did research under his doctoral advisor, Professor George Fills, no less. So really coming full circle there. And Mike and I have also kept in touch regularly since Lafayette, and he has kept giving me really invaluable advice throughout my early career. I don't think you could overstate his impact in a positive way on my professional development.
That's awesome. And I do think it's pretty rare actually if you go back and you watch all the director's cuts that one person was responsible for getting somebody involved in not just the profession. Well, people aren't verbal about it maybe, but also involved in the society as well. So that's fantastic.
Yeah,
Now,
Mike.
oh, go for it. Sorry.
Oh, sure, sure. Mike enjoys getting his students involved in the Delaware Valley chapter of the Geo-Institute. And so I attended several DVGI meetings alongside him. And, I only got a little bit more into GI in general in grad school because we, courtesy of Professor Mike Duncan at VT, would attend the Geo-Congress every year. And then I got back into DVGI when I moved home to Philadelphia area. And I'm now the chapter's webmaster. So you were asking about why people, you mentioned the topic of why people pick the field. And if I could, I'd like to add a word on that.
Sure.
Because as you probably noticed if you've been watching the interview, or in your case, conducting the interview, I love trains. And as a kid, I went to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania out near Lancaster and the Steamtown National Historic Site near Scranton, more times than I think my parents care to remember. Because for me, I never tired of seeing the engines and the passenger and freight cars. I really liked the GG1, the electric locomotive that rode the rails between New York, Washington, and Harrisburg for nearly half a century. And so back at home, I'd play with my Brio trains and Thomas the Tank Engine and his friends for hours on end. I think they're still in a closet in my parents' basement somewhere. What's not in a closet in my parents' basement, because it's on 3 ping pong tables in the basement, is the model train layout my dad and I built for G-scale trains. So when I wanted to pick a career, Civi was a pretty natural decision.
That is very good. I like that a lot. Oh, and that's one of our most interesting, I think, how did you first get involved stories. I like that. This next one I kind of put in here because, well, I'm going to be 45 this year, and I've been thinking a lot about this lately, but also because of your appreciation for history. I felt like maybe this would be a good one. Michael, what makes you feel old?
Well, I think the question presumes that at one point I didn't feel old. I'm not sure that's ever been the case for me. I'm something of an old soul. A lot of people have told me that, and I agree with their opinion. I'm certainly old school in a lot of my mannerisms, the way I talk, the way I conduct myself, even the music to which I listen. And I've always loved history. For instance, back in elementary school, a lot of the boys my age were into Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon, which, sure, if that's your thing, it's your thing. For me, I was reading books about the presidents. Not your encyclopedic biographies, but I was reading books about them, and I think I can still rattle off the list of all the presidents.
How fast can you do it? Should this be a director's cut thing? Could you do it now?
I could, yes.
Oh, let's go. You're on.
George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, Martin Van Buren, William Henry Harrison, John Tyler, James Polk, Zachary Taylor, Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, James Buchanan, Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, Ulysses S. Grant, Rutherford Hayes, James Garfield, Chester Arthur, Grover Cleveland, Part 1, Benjamin Harrison, Grover Cleveland, Part 2, William McKinley, Teddy Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, Woodrow Wilson, Warren Harding, Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Joe Biden.
And I counted, everybody. He got it. That was impressive. I'm thrilled by that.
Nice.
Woo! This is the magic of director's cut. I love that. So anything else on feeling old?
I think it also didn't hurt in terms of my interest in history, which is one of the main reasons I do feel old quite often, that I was surrounded from an early age by a lot of living history. So I used to spend a lot of time with my mom's parents. We were close to them, and they were both born in the early 1920s. My grandfather, for whom I'm named, had been in the Navy in the Second World War. And I would listen to them discuss their memories from the Great Depression and World War II, especially my grandmother, because she was alive until I was 25. So she was alive during the period in which I learned to kind of ask more perceptive questions. And their memories really brought that period of history to life for me, because it's one thing to hear about how hard times were during the Depression. It's quite another to hear your grandmother remember when she asked her father for a penny for candy and he told her he didn't have any spare change.
Yeah.
And then as I grew up, I did the Boy Scouts, and for my Eagle Scout project, I interviewed 10 U.S. military veterans who had served in eras or conflicts ranging from World War II to Operation Desert Storm. And I taped those interviews and sent them to the Library of Congress for preservation. And both of my grandparents, in fact, all four of them, and most of the veterans I interviewed are now deceased. And so hearing their stories as they lived history has really been one of my greatest privileges to date. I'm really thankful for that. And all those conversations taught me a couple of important lessons about history that I'm glad I was able to learn fairly early in my study of it. And one of them is that it's never preordained. So it's an invaluable guide as we navigate contemporary challenges, just because we don't know what the right answer is in advance. There's never an inevitability to it. Nor is history just some subject from kind of dry, if well-intentioned textbooks. It's real, it's relatable. Above everything else, it's human. Our predecessors were mortal, and we do have to learn from their failings, of which there were many. But their humanity makes their accomplishments all the more remarkable even to this day. Look at somebody like Lincoln. The movie Lincoln is my absolute favorite, because it shows that he sometimes resorted to not great things like penny ante corruption, and even occasionally not being totally honest, in order to accomplish the truly great thing of ending U.S. slavery. I would consider that to be the greatest stain on our country in its history, and Lincoln managed to end it by constitutional amendment. And I think that's just a good example of how our predecessors' flaws and shortcomings make their successes all the more remarkable.
That is great. Now, we're going to get to the blog in just a minute, because we have to talk about that, right? We can't go through the interview without talking about that. Got one final question before we get there. I had to ask this, living in the Northeast as you do. What's your most typical deli order?
So, to the disappointment of some of my fellow Philadelphian area folks, it's not a cheesesteak, although they all are very good. I'm always ready for a good buffalo chicken cheesesteak or sandwich.
How hot do you like it? Are you a spicy fan or no?
Somewhere in the middle.
And what cheese do you go with on the chicken cheesesteak?
Blue, if I can get it.
Wow. Ooh, that's exotic. I like that a lot. I'm glad I put that question in there. So now we're going to close with two questions about the blog. And for everybody out there, if you haven't read the Geotechnical History blog, you can go to geo-institute.org and look for the posts in the news feed and just soak them up. They're all fantastic. We love putting them up. They get a lot of attention every time, and they're super well written and on interesting topics. So where you can't go wrong. Michael, can you walk us through the story of the blog, how you started, where you get inspiration, and so on?
Sure. So I would say that the interest in history was very much alive and well by the time I graduated Lafayette. I got a bachelor's in civil engineering and a bachelor's in history because I had the room in my schedule. But my interest in geohistory really started during my Virginia Tech days, because we read a lot of papers from pretty much the entire range of dates over which the field has existed, 70s, 60s, 50s, even a couple from the 40s. And they really piqued my interest in how our body of geotechnical knowledge has evolved and developed. So obviously graduate school keeps you pretty busy. I had to put that interest on the back burner for a few years. But I took it out again in late 2020. It was the heart of COVID. The world, to put it mildly, was in disarray. And those of us who were lucky enough to stay healthy and employed needed new pastimes toward which to direct our energies. And I had actually been reading contemporary geotechnical books, trying to improve my technical acumen a little bit. And most of them had a chapter or a couple pages on the history of the profession. And these accounts were factually sound. They just were overly generalized, especially given all the nuances I had seen in the papers my classmates and I had read at Virginia Tech. And so my first idea, which I bounced off my friend and Virginia Tech classmate Thomas Kennedy, was to try writing a book about the history of geotechnical engineering. And thank goodness for all of us that Thomas heard my crazy scheme out and said, well, why don't we try a blog? And the rest is quite literally history, because I've spent the past 3 years blogging about geohistory, first with Thomas, and then when our interests took us in different directions, so solo. And then I've also built a sizable collection of historical geotechnical books, articles, and miscellaneous pieces.
That is very cool. So before we recorded, I talked a little bit about my experiences starting a blog like now almost 25 years ago, and it was challenging, and it wasn't the way I expected it to go at all, I think. From when you decided you were going to do this to now, as somebody who's done it for a few years and you're a lot of posts in and you've kind of seen what it looks like, what's the most surprising thing to you about it? Whether it's the process or whether it's, I was also always afraid I was going to run out of ideas. And sometimes it doesn't happen. You just keep going. So what's been most surprising to you about it?
I would say the benefits that I think it has, because we've all heard a variation of the old saying, well, if we knew what we were doing, it wouldn't be called research. And that was definitely true for this, because I started it with Thomas without any clear understanding of where it might go or how it might benefit the profession. Yeah. And only now, a couple years into it, do I really see some of the big picture benefits it could have, potentially. I think it may help our profession refine or revise as appropriate our fundamentals. And that, of course, will improve public safety, best practices, and savings on time and money as applicable. And it'll also help us navigate the daily challenges that we face both individually and collectively as a field by connecting us to our predecessors' experiences. I think it's trite but true to say that you can always think of experiences you can always think of history as being like a library of other people's experiences upon which you can draw.
That's really good. So the logical final question here is to ask a more specific question, maybe about geotechnical history, and that's what we're going to do. What is your all-time favorite historical geotechnical story or case history?
Sure. So I think I'll tweak the question just a bit, if I may, because I don't think I can call this one my favorite by any stretch, but the one that is most meaningful to me has to be the write-up I did on the South Fork Dam breach and Johnstown flood of 1889. So I stopped by the Johnstown Flood National Memorial in late 2021, and I was shocked when I first saw it. I think anyone who visits will be just as dumbfounded as I was, because the scale is just colossal. Yeah. And I had read David McCullough's book on the Johnstown flood in college. It's a good read. It was actually the very first book he wrote. And so I started looking around to see what I could learn about the civil engineering aspects of the dam breach, specifically the geotechnical portion of it. And there was some information on the hydraulics and hydrology of the flood, but not really much on the geotech. And so I decided to take a crack at writing something myself. And that, is, by the way, is usually how these geotechnical history write-ups go. I have an idea. I look to see what's been written about it, if anything. And if there's nothing out there, I try to go for it. And so Thomas and I authored the first version of the write-up in say 2022, back when we had a private website of our own. And then a few months later, we connected with you, Brad, and the GI to continue the blog in partnership with you and your peers. And at around the same time, Thomas and I found our interests had diverged, as so often happens in life. And so my friend went in one direction, and I took on the blog as a solo venture. And I had intended to make just a couple revisions, as you may recall, Brad, when we were talking about reposting the Johnstown flood write-up. But as I started revising, I soon decided the total rewrite was needed for two reasons. First, I felt like I had to put my best foot forward for the GI blog debut. And second, if I were going to add something to such a well-known story, I had to pull out all the stops. And you could also add the third reason that, and I think it's the most important one actually, that when 2,500 people have died in a disaster, it's important to put forth the best effort you can to make sure that nothing comparable happens again, at least on your watch, that history doesn't repeat itself. And so I really dug in deep. I put together a write-up that was probably quite a bit longer than what you and Elizabeth Casino had in mind. It certainly was longer than what I had in mind. And you and Elizabeth serialized the redone write-up, and it was, I think, fairly well received. And I also got to present it both at a DVGI meeting and at a graduate student seminar down at Virginia Tech, which was really a kind of nice coming home opportunity for me. And now I'm actually in the middle of revising the write-up a second time. For the Association of State Dam Safety Officials. They'll have a web page that incorporates the Reader's Digest version of the write-up. Then I'll have the full re-revised write-up posted as a PDF. And next May, I'll actually be doing a webinar on it for them at their invitation, which was really nice. And interesting, given that I've analyzed a levee in geotechnical stability, but I've never really engineered the geotechnical side of a dam. And two of the sources I cited, I think this is worth a show, are actually these vintage editions of Engineering News magazine from June 1889, kind of covering the disaster as it happened. And I think each of them, I think both of them put together were about $30 shipped to my front door. So it's not like I broke the bank on these, but I haven't seen them posted anywhere else since then. And I've written about a lot of fascinating subjects in geohistory to this point, Brad. I hope a lot more lie ahead of me, but the Johnstown flood resonated strongly with me. I used to think, oh, it must be because it happened in Pennsylvania. I'm a Pennsylvanian, but I think it's deeper than that. Because researching the disaster for this write-up really kind of taught me that our work as geoprofessionals is technical, but our work's impacts are fundamentally human. You cannot stand atop the remnants of the South Fork Dam and not picture the horrible suffering in Johnstown and the neighboring villages when the flood wave, which it wasn't a wave, it looked more like a tsunami, broke over the town, and not understand why the credential of a professional engineer or professional geologist is truly, in the words of one Virginia Tech professor, a license to kill.
That is a good story, and Michael is right. You could go back and you can check out the serialized version of that. I hesitate to call it a set of posts because it is really more, it's almost like a book chapter, the way it's written and everything, but it's fantastic. You can go back on geo-institute.org and read that all the way through. Michael's account is, I'd go with gripping. It's pretty good. Make it all the way through I believe we did it in 4 or 5 parts. Go check it out. There are a series of other posts up there as well. And he'll have maybe we'll make a big announcement about something he's doing in Geostrata here pretty soon, but we'll keep that one under wraps for now, to keep the viewers engaged and involved. But you made it through all 10 questions. You did it with flying colors. We learned a lot about you. Hopefully we draw some new readers to the blog. Director's Cut does a lot of things, lifts a lot of weight here. For our viewers, if you liked what you saw, and you probably did because you're here at the end, click like, subscribe, and get notifications, and we'll let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel. Michael, thank you for doing this. I hope it was fun.
Oh, I had a great time, Brad. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thanks for coming on, and for all of our viewers, we will see you with a brand new episode of Director's Cut next week.
Yes,